بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. This is an excerpt of a paper that I wrote around 2009 entitled Contemporary Extremism in Islam, a British Context. What I intend to do is highlight a type of extremism that has been prevalent among the Salafis but seldom spoken about. And it's not an extremism that is equated to the Kharijite, Takfiri type of extremism. It's extremism among Salafis. It's a behavioral extremism. And before going into the excerpt, I'll explain what my research from the PhD in 2009 highlighted and differentiated between. And the recent museum conference in Washington, D.C. addressed the difference between behavioral extremism and ideological extremism. Behavioral extremism is sometimes called deed-related extremism, and ideological extremism can be referred to sometimes as belief-related extremism. Now, alhamdulillah, as Salafis, we don't have the ideological or belief-related extremism, which is attributable to the Khariji Takfiri belief. And we know where they go astray with the ideological extremism. The behavioral extremism, however, is subjective in its general sense. So, for example, the niqab is banned in France as it's being seen as behaviorally extreme, but in places like Saudi Arabia, it's not seen as behavioral extremism, so it's subjective. But I'm not going to talk on the more general behavioral extremism of this description, the attire, the niqab, the beard. What we've seen emerge from the Salafis since the late 90s, 1996, 97 onwards, and it emanated from the UK, was the behavioral extremism where Salafis, or those claiming to be Salafis, started a disparagement of other Salafis and basically denigrating them, insulting and using the deen to try and marginalize particular Salafi entities, personalities, and it didn't stop at the local geographical region that they were from. It spread like a cancer around to the extent that they found ground and excuse and reasons, many of them based on lies, to discredit scholars as well. We know who these individuals are. Go by different names, started off as Oasis, then moved on to call themselves Salafi Publications, or Maktaba Salafiyya as they're called. And the question that needs to be posed to senior scholars are, can cults actually be Salafi? Can a cult claiming to hold the truth be Salafi? Because in Salafiyya, which is Islam, there isn't cultism. And some may come and try and use the noble ahadith talking about the saved sect and the Taif al-Mansura and say these are cults. No, they're not cults. Cults and sects. And in the terminology, the brothers who speak Arabic will be able to elucidate even more that no, they cannot say, yes, we are the saved sect, the saved cult. These cultish tendencies are blameworthy. So anyway, the behavioral extremism that we're witnessing that has caused so much devastation amongst communities is the behavioral extremism that we have witnessed from this particular cult in all its shape and forms and sizes. And I'm not going to talk about the characteristics of cultism in detail because we've got our brothers like Abu Alia and others who have really put out good pieces of work and articulated this very, very well. So this recording is not for that. Looking at the paper that I'd written, I'm going to read particular paragraphs, and I will stop and explain some of them as need be. One of the more lucid examples of excessiveness emanating from Salafiyya, particularly in the West, is the manner of propagation and discourses between some Salafis and their perceived opponents. This invariably extends to non-Salafi orientated Muslims, but suffice it to comment on the disputes within the movement itself. One author, Hamid, highlights the emergence of the super Salafis in the UK, who began what he terms a purist inquisition by labelling other Muslim groups and Salafis as deviant. In fact, these particular Salafis established an organization which became known, quote, for their increasingly intolerant and polemical attitude to former colleagues, as well as their vindictiveness towards other Muslim groups, end quote. One academic's inference to the excessiveness of the Salafis becomes apparent when he describes the same organization as Hamid, Salafi Publications, and observes that they eschew human systems of argumentation, preferring instead to make a point and follow it with a series of direct quotes from the Quran and sound hadith collections. In some cases, a religious position is stated in a sentence or two and is followed by page after page of quotations. For a Western audience, the presentation seems mind-numbing and lacks convincing argumentation. Now, that's from a non-Muslim academic, and many of us as Salafis won't have a problem with that because our basis is the Quran and authentic hadith and statements of the Salaf and our ulama. But when we look more closely at this cult, this group now, you won't even find references to Quran and hadith and even statements of the Sahaba or ijma of the Sahaba. You won't find these now. What you'll hear is from their leaders, what their leaders say, or go back to the small group of scholars who endorse them. This is what's happened there, and I think that there's a number of our brothers are highlighting that these days. In fact, going back with my paper, the composite nature of this group accords with Drs. J. and B. Cole's observations regarding social exchange theory, particularly as it relates to group polarization. And this is what they say, quote, "Group polarization occurs when a group of people making a decision shift their original opinions so that they become more extreme. The most extreme form of the group polarization is groupthink, which occurs when a highly cohesive in-group of individuals becomes so concerned with finding consensus among the members that they lose touch with reality. The optimal conditions for groupthink to occur are a highly cohesive group that perceives a threat, an active leader who advocates a solution to that threat, and insulation from independent judgments about that solution. Groups that form this psychological environment develop an illusion of invulnerability, which may predispose them to take risks due to excessive optimism." They continue to highlight a collective rationalization among the group, which comprises of unquestioning belief in the moral superiority of the in-group, the shared illusion of unanimity, and negative stereotypes of the out-groups. I'll conclude at this particular stage regarding this cult. And I think that from my paper and from what we're all hearing of late, which is coming in waves as it should do, that the cultism that emerged from 96, 97 of this group and where they've got to now is becoming manifest. Many individuals are coming away from this, seeing the cultism of these individuals and the lies and the lengths they go to preserve their cult, to preserve their brand, financially and otherwise. Some of us were never fooled by this. As they say in the American states sense, we never drank the Kool-Aid. And inshallah, those who are realizing the reality of this cult will move away from it and start practicing the deen and the sunnah and salafiyah as it should be practiced, as it has been practiced all these years before, up until this cult came about. Cults come and go. They may still exist, but now it's time to turn away and ignore the ugly reality of them. And I'll continue with some other recordings a little bit later. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.